Ma'am, per procedure, you will relocate now.
This is my assigned seat. I paid for it and I won't be moved.
You're holding up the cabin. Just move so we can depart.
Respect the ticket and the record. I belong in this seat.
Per procedure, you will relocate now.
This is my assigned seat. I paid for it and I won't be moved.
Around them, glasses hum against trays, a curtain sighs shut, and the aisle tightens with the hush of people pretending not to listen. A husband's hand trembles over a call button that glows like a small warning star, a pilot's calm shapes the air, and somewhere a manager rehearses a word policy as if it were mercy. The moment holds brittle and bright, where rules speak louder than truth. Who decides what justice looks like? This is only the beginning. What comes next will be even more intense. Do you agree with how the main character acted? Share your thoughts below, and please like and follow to help the message travel. The busiest travel day of summer hums through Chicago, O'Hare like a long, steady cord. Stroller wheels ticking over terrazzo floors, baristas calling out names at a crowded Starbucks, rolling suitcases whispering in every direction. Monica Harris adjusts her blazer, whispering to herself that today must look like any other trip. The secret in her bag says otherwise. She stands in the bright spill of morning sun near the windows of Terminal 3. A to-go cup warming her hand while the public address chimes float above the crowd. On the concourse screens, fireworks and small flags advertise Independence Day sales. The country is in a festive mood, but the airport feels like a living timetable. Everyone rushing, everyone judged by whether they make or miss a moment. She will not miss hers. The chapter of the day that matters begins before a single wheel leaves the ground. Her goal is plain and quiet. Blend in, read the room, notice what others let slide. She watched a gate agent 2 kiosks overwave a late passenger through with a smile. She watched another agent cut a conversation short with a woman in a headscarf. Patterns live in those soft places. The narrator sees her lift the lid and breathe in coffee steam, like it might steady the hand that will soon hold a passport and a boarding pass, and a simple, disarming smile. Morning at O'Hare is bright enough to show everything. A row of rental cars crawls past the glass. Beyond them, ground crews in safety vests dance their practice choreography. Inside, a Chicago breakfast crowd moves in pulses. Travelers in baseball caps juggling paperbacks and muffins. A couple in their 60s splitting an egg sandwich. A teenager in a Letterman jacket tilting a straw through crushed ice. The Starbucks line snakes and curls. Someone at the front drops a handful of coins and 2 strangers lean in to help gather them. Over by the windows, a toddler waves at a plane. As if the plane could wave back, Monica stands near Gate H as the loudspeakers announce final boarding for a flight to Charlotte, then early boarding for a flight to Phoenix. She takes in details the way a careful gardener takes in weather, not with alarm, but with respect. A woman with a silver bob and a man in a navy cardigan, John and Martha Clark, the sort of couple who keep their travel documents in a tidy envelope, watch the first-class line gather. Martha's mouth turns down when she sees Monica take her place near the stanchions. John leans close, whispers something that hovers like a draft. Monica knows the sidelong glance, the tiny purse of the lips, the way a half-smile never quite arrives. A text glows on her screen. Marcus Reed, somewhere in the economy cluster, with a book he never plans to finish. He has typed only 4 words, "We watch and wait," and added a period that reads like a promise. She slides the phone away. The story will be told without names if it can be. The story will be told with names if it must. Her flight to San Francisco posts a new line of text on the gate monitor. Pre-boarding in 10 minutes. The agent at this gate, Emily Rogers, moves with crisp efficiency. Emily has a neat ponytail and a smile that lands more on the air than on anyone's eyes. She calls a colleague over to point at something on the screen. Her finger taps a rhythm on the counter. Monica watches the light on Emily's face shift from neutral to measuring when their gazes meet. The crowd makes its small rituals. Boarding passes tucked and retucked into wallets, people clearing their throats, stretching calves, silencing phones. A man in a fitted suit. Robert King takes up space with the confidence of someone used to winning the small lotteries of modern life. He laughs at the message, pockets his phone, and drapes a jacket over one arm so the label is visible. Monica steps out of line to drop her empty cup and comes back to find the Clarks a pace closer to the stanchions. Martha looks at her shoes, then up at the boarding sign, then at Monica again with a careful, almost performative neutrality. Monica's expression does not change. The narrator can feel her patience like a slow drum under the melody of the terminal. "Good morning," Emily calls, the microphone turning her words soft at the edges. "We'll begin with families who need a bit more time down the jet bridge, then active duty, then first class." The crowd shifts. A family with a collapsible stroller folds and refolds its joints. A man in a White Sox cap gives a small wave and lifts a car seat through the queue. Emily's smile flashes. She compliments a toddler's tiny sneakers with a voice pitched just so. The first pre-boarders roll forward. Monica touches a zipper on her carry-on and checks the seat assignment for the third time. To Bravo. Not a luxury so much as a place she paid for with the same currency as anyone else in this line. Dollars. Time. Planning. A sense that comfort purchase should arrive without debate. She stands in the light, head high, the kind of posture people call elegant when they mean unbothered. First class only now, Emily says, scanning. The beep is a gatekeeper's hymn, welcoming some and stopping others. When Monica offers her phone, Emily's eyes do not land on the name. They land on the person. A pause settles, small but felt like a draft under a door. May I see an identification as well? Emily asks, voice smooth, fingers already moving over the keyboard. Monica hands over what was always going to be handed over, and Emily studies it with a thoroughness she has not yet shown today. Behind Monica, Robert shifts his weight and sighs the way busy men sigh when the world has the audacity to slow them down. Ahead, the jet bridge yawns like a tunnel of permission. Monica has spent enough time in places like this to know the difference between conversation and delay. She does not break the quiet. The narrator hears the click of keys and the soft scratch of a pen as Emily writes something on a sticky note. A number, a code, a reassurance to herself. The screen reflects blue on Emily's cheek. Thank you, Emily says at last, returning the phone and the card with a smile that does not journey all the way to her eyes. One moment while I confirm a detail. Monica steps to the side. The details do not need confirming. She watches two other passengers, both white, both wearing the kind of knit that says good taste, breeze through the scan with quick beeps and quicker grins. One of them makes a small joke about champagne. Emily laughs as if she has heard it for the first time. Martha Clark watches too, and the corners of her mouth soften when the women pass. John taps his envelope against his palm and clears his throat. What's the hold-up? Robert asks, nobody in particular, which is to say, everybody. Emily does not answer him. She glances at Monica and then at the screen again. A second agent wanders over, and the two of them confer in the hush of people who do not want to be overheard. The narrator does not need to lean in to understand the malady. Skepticism wrapped in procedure, concern wrapped in policy, the small alibis that keep hands looking clean. Monica considers the choreography of this moment. Her aim is still the same blend, observe, remember, but the air has shifted. The chapter's purpose is almost complete. The seed of doubt has been planted by a stranger who holds the power of a scanner and the authority of a smile. The airport's vastness cannot dilute the intimacy of small judgments. A child in a Spider-Man t-shirt points at the plane and says he can hear the sky. His mother hushes him kindly. An elderly man thanks a cleaning attendant, adding a quiet sir that lands with real respect. In a place built to move bodies, gray steel moves too. Marcus drifts past within the economy's swell, eyes on his book, posture loose. He does not look at her. He does not need to. The narrator catches the quick flick of his gaze to the gate desk and then away, that small accountant of fate's tallying interactions at a distance. He peels out of the flow toward a water fountain, where he pretends to puzzle over whether a bottle can be refilled from a sensor that never quite senses. He gives up and takes a sip straight from the arc, then stands, just another traveler deciding when to line up. Emily's colleague steps back from the screen. Emily squares her shoulders and squares her smile. Thank you for your patience, she says. A sentence that has become a spell in modern life. For some, it opens doors. For others, it opens a corridor of waiting. Monica allows the words to pass and settle. She knows that how someone thanks you tells you who they think you are. Across the carpet, a gate for Denver erupts in applause as a flight crew arrives late and breathless. A toddler in the San Francisco line drops a plush bear and a man with a sleeve tattoo kneels to hand it back with ceremony, making the child giggle. Morning warms toward midday. The narrator can almost hear the country ticking toward a holiday where charcoal will glow and porches will fill. Yet here, right now, the stage is smaller and the stakes are personal. What else can be seen? A pair of shoes polished past the point of vanity. A boarding pass creased in ways that speak of nervous hands. A phone face lit by a prayer for an upgrade. A smile practiced too often. A name badge pinned dead center. Emily. Monica's gaze holds there, not with challenge, but with the steady, neutral attention of someone who expects the world to behave. Emily glances down, types again, glances up. Something in her expression clicks into place. Not relief exactly, and not welcome. More like a decision has been made and the script will now be followed to the letter. She reaches for the microphone, thinks better of it, sets it down. The narrator notices the smallest tremor in the way she inhales, the same way a person draws breath before a note that must be held. Monica moves toward the boarding gate, the chill in Emily's eyes, holds her fingers still skating over the keyboard as if searching for a flaw. Monica remembered the cool, measuring look from the gate, the way a smile could be a velvet rope, and she steadied her breath as she stepped across the threshold into the aircraft and into the front cabin that glowed with the kind of soft light meant to quiet second thoughts. Her purpose did not change. Observe without inviting spectacle. Hold the line that said, "A purchased seat is not a favor granted, but a promise kept." First class spread out before her with wide leather shelves, aisle rugs that cushioned footfalls, and a hush that felt curated. The window shades were half open, so rectangles of daylight lay over armrests like folded napkins. A flight attendant arranged champagne flutes on a tray, thin stems chiming together with each small movement. Overhead, the bins opened and closed in a measured rhythm. She set her carry-on in a space above her row, slid a smaller bag under the footwell, and lowered herself into 2 Bravo, feeling the seatbelt click into its clasp with the ordinary intimacy of a routine about to begin. She took in the subtle scent of citrus cleaner, the stitched edge of the headrest, and the printed card that described a menu featuring roasted salmon and a salad of farro and herbs. This was not luxury as shown. It was comfortable as a contract. A man in a fitted jacket, Robert King, paused near the bulkhead, glanced down the aisle, and checked his watch, as if time itself answered him. From behind, a second flight attendant moved through a checklist with the dependable, practiced care of someone who liked rules, because they protected everyone. She wanted the moment to pass unnoticed. The plane did not agree. A pocket of silence gathered, and in it stepped Emily Rogers, the same efficient gate agent now wearing the authority of a clipboard she did not need to carry. With her was Susan Miller, a senior flight attendant whose smile curved without lifting her eyes. They stopped exactly at Monica's row. Emily's tone was warm enough to hold shape, cool enough to suggest it would not bend. "Miss Harris," she said, "there appears to be a double booking associated with this seat. We're going to ask you to relocate." The word "ask" did not feel like a question. Monica kept her voice even, its register chosen for clarity rather than heat. "This is my assigned seat," she said. "It is printed on my boarding pass." Emily nodded as if the printing were a charming detail. "I understand," she replied, eyes on the manifesto in her hand. "But we need this seat for a premium passenger." The phrase landed like a small stone. Susan's glance slid to Robert, whose expression had settled into patient possession. Monica felt the cabin notice without wanting to be caught noticing. Newspapers lowered, a laptop screen dimmed, a pair of gray heads leaned together across an aisle. The air around her changed density, the way rooms do when someone chooses a side in a game not everyone agreed to play. The first scene of the conflict took the form of procedure, which is to say, distance dressed as fairness. Monica unfolded her boarding pass so that her name and the seat assignment faced outward, a polite display of fact. "Is there documentation of an equipment change?" she asked. "Has the manifest been updated accordingly?" Emily maintained the curve of her smile. "We can discuss this at the front," she said, as if the conversation were a courtesy she was extending rather than a corridor she was closing. Susan added a sentence that sounded like help but moved the same direction. "We do have a seat available in the main cabin," she said. "We'll make sure you are comfortable." Comfortable did not appear on her face. Robert's jaw settled, not belligerent, not benign, merely certain. Monica tested the weight of the moment. The goal here was not to win a skirmish in an aisle. It was to measure a pattern without letting the pattern swallow her. "If there is a verified error," she said, "I would like to see the notation. Otherwise, I intend to remain in my assigned seat." The hum of the air system rose a notch, a quiet mechanical sigh. Emily did not sigh. She tilted the clipboard and wrote something that did not need to be written, then lifted her eyes. "Miss Harris, I am going to have to insist," she said. And the politeness turned finally into the thing it had always been, a decision already made. The second scene arrived as movement. Susan reached for the overhead and lowered Monica's carry-on with careful hands. "We will help you with your bag," she said, and the "we" was a gentle plural that folded the crew into a single will. Monica stood because she would not be lifted. She stood because she would not give anyone the pleasure of a refusal performed for the crowd. Her hands remained steady. The aisle felt narrower than it had moments before. She stepped out and let Susan pass, then waited as a couple across the way tucked their feet in and gave her a sympathetic inch. The plane received her like a home that had decided to rearrange the furniture while she was still inside. Emily's tone did not change as they moved toward the curtain. "Thank you for understanding," she offered. Monica made no performance of understanding what she did not respect. Along the way, Claire Johnson, another attendant, younger, her posture pulled a bit too straight by nerves, met Monica's eyes with a flicker of something human and unsettled. It passed like a small cloud across a white Sunday. At the bulkhead, Emily gestured in a way that could be read as welcome or dismissal. "Right this way," she said. The third scene implanted a line of dialogue into memory where it could root and branch later. As they reached the curtain, Robert slipped into 2 Bravo with the casual grace of someone backing into a space that had been warmed for him. He released a small breath as if order had been restored. A tray appeared as if on cue, and a flute of something cold settled against his palm. He declined the nuts as though he were above temptation rather than allergic to it. Monica did not look back. She listened as the rustle of a safety card and the clink of glass stitched themselves into the moment as decorations for a decision someone else had made about where she belonged. She answered nothing because there was nothing to answer. The seat they offered in the main cabin turned out to be the kind that pretends needs are optional. A woman in the window seat already held a travel pillow against her neck. A man on the aisle had found the perfect angle to claim the armrest without appearing to claim anything at all. Susan slid the bag into an overhead 4-rows back and assured Monica it would be right there after landing, as though the distance she created did not count if she named it temporary. Monica settled carefully, shoulders square, breath slow. The cabin was louder here, a bright tangle of chatter and podcasts and children negotiating snacks. The hum of the engines would arrive later. For now, the soundscape belonged to people making do. The climax arrived without shouting. It arrived in the posture of a person forced to choose between dignity and delay, and in the double knowledge that neither should have been demanded. In first class, a service car bumped softly into position. The curtain drew shut with a practiced whisper of fabric over a track. The business of the front went on as if nothing had happened, which is one way to tell yourself that nothing did. Monica felt the heat rise in her cheeks, then pass, felt the small ache at the base of her neck where the headrest did not quite meet her height, and allowed herself exactly one measured exhale before she reached for her phone. She was not in the confrontation. She was a witness. The narrative held, warm and steady, as it laid the setting down in layers for anyone listening with the kind of attention that keeps a person safe in public places. The temperature was the mild kind favored by modern jets, making sweaters unnecessary and blankets a comfort more than a need. The service in first class would include a glass of sparkling wine poured with ceremony. The service in economy would include a cart of ginger ale and pretzels moving at the pace of a patient librarian. In the galley, a small clock ticked its way toward departure, and the crew member counted meal trays in a whisper, because counting aloud turns numbers into spells. A polite announcement explained that boarding would pause for a moment while a seating issue was resolved. The phrase, seating issue acting as white paint over a crack. John and Martha Clark pretended to read, then exchanged a glance that said they had seen something they would never have to name out loud. The story, told to an older ear, did not hurry. It observed how courtesy can be used as a lever, how policy can be pushed like a door that locks from one side, how calm can be a choice that saves a person from becoming someone else's performance. The dialogue stayed measured because the audience deserved respect and the characters deserve their own voices. Well, make sure you are taken care of, Susan had said earlier, but taking care of does not mean the same thing when spoken down an aisle as it does when it is lived. If there's an error, Monica had said, please show me the notation. And because no notation was shown, the lack became a notation of its own. There's a seat in the main cabin, Emily had said. And there was. That was never the point. We appreciate your patience, she added. And patience is a currency that, when spent too often by the same people, becomes a tax. The narrator did not raise a voice on anyone's behalf. It simply refused to look away. The little rituals of an American morning continued to anchor the scene even as its meaning deepened. Somewhere in the rear, a teenager traded the window for an aisle with a grateful nod and a whispered thanks that sounded like home training. A mother counted out crackers, pressing each into a palm smaller than her own. A man took his cap off when a flight attendant asked him to raise it so she could see his eyes. He smiled and put it back on again with a lighter hand. Courtesy moved in both directions here. The wound did not. The plane filled its seats the way stories fill themselves with turning points you only recognize after they turn. The emotional texture that older listeners recognize the tug between wanting to speak and choosing to wait, the weight of being observed without being seen ran like a low river under each sentence. Monica kept her posture open, her hands quiet, her attention working. The elderly couple across the aisle dropped the pen and she picked it up for them, because kindness does not turn off when the room goes cold. Claire passed by and asked if anyone needed water. Her voice did not tremble, but it wore concern like a thin coat. When she reached Monica's row, she paused half a heartbeat too long, as if she wished to say more but had not yet chosen the cost. Then the cart squeaked and she moved on. The chapter knew its ending before the plane left the ground. The seatbelt sign would click on later, the engine note would deepen later, the sun would tip and lean into the afternoon later. For now, the story needed only to place its final image in the mind, the person at the center of it all, sitting exactly where she had been told to sit, and refusing to surrender what could still be kept clarity, dignity, the record. She eased back against the headrest and set the screen brightness low so the light did not shout her business. The last line belonged to the promise she made to herself and to the work still to be done. In economy, Monica wedges into the middle seat in row 23, and texts Marcus, "It started." Monica eased into the middle seat and let the cabin settle around her like a quilt stitched from 100 separate journeys. The curtain to the front had already been drawn, its fabric a soft border between the hush of ceremony and the clatter of ordinary travel. She remembered Marcus' steady advice from earlier mornings and other flight patterns, watched the details, and let that sentence become the pace of her breathing. She did not reach for righteous anger, she reached for clarity. The narrator could feel the way she widened her attention, as if unscrewing the cap on the lens so it could drink in more light. The economy had its own music. Air vents purred above each row, overhead bins lashed with soft thumps, a citrus clean scent wrestled politely with warm pretzel and brewed coffee. Children traded crayons, a teenager tested headphone volume, and two road warriors compared loyalty points, as if they were baseball cards from another era. A mother angled a bottle just so, murmuring thanks when a stranger stepped aside to let her buckle car seat. Across the aisle, an elderly couple spoke in cathedral, whispers about who would take the window on the next leg to visit a granddaughter. All of it made a chorus that older ears would recognize. Small kindnesses happening even when something unkind had just happened. Monica's goal was simple enough to sound like nothing and hard enough to mean everything. She would observe without adding friction. She would let conversation reveal itself instead of chasing it. She rested a notebook on her thigh and lowered the brightness on her screen so that no one read her intentions in the glow. The narrator could see her handwriting, neat, uncluttered, each line dated in words instead of numbers, because habits matter when truth will one day be counted aloud. A few seats ahead and one across, a woman with a careful posture of long decades skin, the color of polished walnut, hair wrapped in a scarf of muted blues, pressed the call button. The attendant light made a small, dignified star in the recirculated air. "Excuse me, may I have a blanket, please?" she asked when a passing flight attendant glanced her way. Claire Johnson's name sat on a small silver square that caught each bounce of the ceiling light. "I will be right back," Claire said, voice pleasant, feet already moving toward the galley, the little star capped shining. Minutes stretched in travel time, which is longer than minutes anywhere else. The woman lifted her hand again, not impatient, simply present. "Ma'am, if it's possible, a blanket would help." Claire nodded as she passed the second time, her tray full of plastic cups that clicked like ice. "Right after service," she said without slowing. The woman folded her hands in her lap, as if to keep them from betraying how much cold can ache when joints are not young. The narrator felt the patience that older listeners know well, the kind learned from waiting rooms and bus schedules and promises made in general terms. Beside the woman sat a man in a pale sweater the color of seafoam, the sort of knit sold near golf courses and stewardship committees. He had introduced himself earlier as Preston, with a handshake that ended before it began. He leaned into the aisle and lifted two fingers, a small flag that people with practice raise when they are ready for service. "Hi there," he called warmly when Claire swung back with the cart. "Could we get a blanket for the lady next to me? And some water?" "Thank you so much." Claire's face brightened. "Of course," she answered, already settling a bottle on his tray. Within a breath, she reached into an overhead and produced a neatly wrapped blanket, as if blankets lived there just for the asking. She placed it in the woman's hands and added a second bottle of water to the tray with a performer's grace. "Anything else I can get you both?" Preston smiled like a man accustomed to the world receiving his voice as a key. The older woman whispered, "Thanks," and unfolded the blanket with a relief that was gratitude and something else too. The recognition that kindness had arrived only when another person's request carried it in. Monica wrote without drama. First request, second request, response. After service, third intervention by neighbor, immediate fulfillment. She did not underline anything. The moment underlined itself. Claire was not cruel. She was busy, decent, juggling. It was the kind of day when good intentions hit a pattern because the pattern wore polite clothes. The narrator refused to let the wardrobe fool it. Farther down the aisle, a young white professional with glossy hair and a laptop the color of old coins slipped a joke across the cart. And Claire laughed with full teeth, placing a ginger ale on a napkin like a seal on a treaty. 2 rows behind, a father in a faded work shirt asked for apple juice for his son. I have to finish this side first, another attendant replied. Not rudely, not warmly, a neutral that felt noticeably cooler than the exchange that had just wrapped like ribbon. Monica did not flinch. She logged tone, sequence, words chosen and not chosen. Behind neutrality and bustle, the map of the cabin began to show its neighborhoods. Marcus rose for the aisle with the unhurried confidence of a man who could sleep anywhere. He paused near Monica's row in the way strangers pause when deciding whether to disturb a seated traveler. Restroom, he said to the air. His mouth barely moved when he passed her shoulder. Keep writing. It's all adding up. The sentence floated like a small lantern down a river that had already chosen its direction. He continued on, one hand resting on headrests as he walked, leaving no trace but balance. The beverage cart turned, brought with it a tide of plastic clinks and paper napkins, and stalled for a moment on a stubborn wheel. Claire took that pause to compose herself the way service professionals do when weariness taps a shoulder. Water for you, ma'am? She asked the older woman, gentler now, and the woman nodded. Thank you, Claire added. Quieter. I'm sorry, took a bit. She meant it. Apologies are not proof that nothing happened. They are proof that something did. Monica wrote that too. Around them, small American rituals continued. A man said sir to a teenager when he asked if he could squeeze past. The teenager smiled back with a yes, sir, that made the man's eyes soften. A woman offered half her snack to the little boy across the aisle after his spill. And his mother said, thank you the way mothers say it when tired and grateful share the same chair. The older listeners knew those sounds, knew how they felt like floorboards even when the house's frame had a crack. Monica shifted, elbow careful, posture open so no one mistook her quiet for surrender. She glanced forward just once, toward the curtain that blocked the view of white seas and place that would soon be warm. Her page gathered observations. Claire's voice bright with a young traveler, clipped with a woman whose request had not traveled well. A pattern in which urgency reached its destination faster when carried by certain people. The way courtesy arrives as a compliment or a compliance depending on who speaks it. The narrator noticed her jaw loosen, not because nothing hurt, but because she would not let hurt tangle her sentences. A new tableau presented itself. A Latina mother across the aisle, hair pulled back in a sturdy twist, raised her hand to request hot water to mix the toddler's oatmeal. Right after beverages, the other attendant repeated, the phrase smoothed by repetition into something harmless sounding. The cart moved 2 rows. A young white man asked for sparkling water and received it along with a cheerful question about his headphones. Great choice, the attendant added. The mother's toddler fussed. When the cart returned, the attendant's smile returned too, but thinner, as if it were rationed. Monica marked it, then closed her notebook for a moment to watch the mother hold a spoon steady so a small mouth could find calm again. Some stories did not need words to be told. The last of the service items were stacked and stowed. Overhead, the lights shifted to a quieter temperature that suggested napping was a virtue. The cabin settled into a sway of podcasts and paperback pages. Preston adjusted his sweater and fell asleep with his mouth slightly open, blanket folded, unused on his lap like a token of an earlier triumph. The older woman pulled her own blanket up to her collarbones and looked out at the bright wing. Gratitude lived there real, earned, generous, but it shared a room with a sober thought. Help had come when someone else called it by name. Monica felt the moment cohere. The climax of this chapter did not explode. It crystallized. She watched as Claire paused in the aisle to chat with the laptop traveler, voice warm and amused, then turned to the older woman with a tone that had dropped a degree. It was not a crime. It was a contour. But contours determine where water flows and where it does not. The narrator let silence do the teaching. The pattern was no longer a suspicion. It was a map. She touched the edge of her notebook and steadied the pen. The plane held its course. Somewhere forward, a galley clock ticked closer to a time when trays would roll again and the curtain might flick for a second, enough for a sliver of the front cabin to flash like a postcard. She did not need the postcard. She had this row, these voices, this slow accumulation that, when told in order and in full, would not be easily dismissed. A chime sounded, not urgent, simply clear, and the cabin brushed awake. The public address crackled to life with the practiced calm older travelers know by heart, a tone that can pour oil on the rust of any announcement. The sentence that followed did not belong to service or snag or stretch. It belonged to the story itself, turning the page it had been waiting to turn. "Miss Harris, could you come forward, please?" The chime that summoned her forward still hung in the air when Monica unbuckled and rose, smoothing the crease in her skirt as if tidiness could anchor a moment that was about to move. She carried with her the memory of the gate, the cool audit of a smile that had measured her before a single word was spoken, and she let that memory calibrate her pace. The aisle breathed around her, shoulders angling, knees tucking, strangers offering the hush of a corridor made by courtesy. The cabin had leveled into its long blue hour. Engines, a steady river, window light, honeyed, the air at that careful temperature modern jets keep to invite drowsy peace. Near the front, the curtain quivered, and when she reached it, a hand pulled it aside with a sort of understated ceremony that lives where rules and respect share space. Captain Daniel Foster waited in the forward galley, posture straight not from stiffness but from a professional habit of carrying outcomes on his back. He had one hand on the counter where the coffee carafes rested, steam making shy ghosts in the air. Up close he wore the calm a good pilot lends to a room simply by entering it, a calm made of training, checklists, and the refusal to pretend that everything goes right just because people hope it will. "Miss Harris," he said, voice pitched to be heard, and to reassure at once. "Thank you for coming up. I want to apologize for the confusion earlier." The word confusion arrived carefully, not as a euphemism but as an acknowledgement that something had bent out of True. Standing beside him, Linda Perez, the lead flight attendant, folded her hands and inclined her head, soft brown eyes holding equal measures of duty and regret. "We would like to offer you a seat in the front cabin," she said, choosing the phrase that allowed dignity to breathe. "Seat 4 Alpha is available and prepared. You will receive full service, of course." The galley light made a small halo on the stainless steel and caught the curve of a cup as another attendant set it down. Monica listened the way a person listens to a weather report they already felt in their bones. She did not rush the quiet. She did not dilute it with a quick forgiveness that would cost more later. When she answered, the cadence stayed even, radio warm, meant for the ears of passengers and crew alike. "I'll accept, but I still have questions." The line hung between the three of them without accusation, without surrender. Captain Foster nodded once, as a man does when he recognizes an unarguable point. "I understand," he said. "For now, allow us to seat you where you were always expected to be." "Hao Bei!" Linda guided her through the curtain, fingertips indicating the path while her voice gave small directions here, mind the cart, there, let me take that cup for you, as if language itself could smooth the edges of a moment that had earlier been all edges. Claire Johnson waited just beyond, posture straighter than necessary, her name badge catching the light like a nervy mirror. She stepped back to let Monica pass, and in the breath of that step, there was something like an apology, not yet spoken, already alive. The cabin that had been curated to sound like peace received Monica again. The carpet softened footsteps, the leather stood ready, and the glassware on the nearby tray sang its fine, high note as the plane hummed on. Seat 4 Alpha was in the second row from the curtain, window side, a small island of quiet with a view of the wing cutting a neat geography through clouds. Monica stowed her bag with care and sat as if the seat were a statement and a tool. The narrator, standing a little outside the moment so older ears could trust what they were hearing, felt the air change in a way more felt than seen. The watchful shift of a cabin taking in that a person had been moved back to the comfort she had paid for. Service adjusted to her presence with practiced grace. A folded linen landed on the armrest. A glass of water made its brief, dignified journey from tray to table. In those ordinary motions, the plane confessed what it had tried to hide under procedure. This is where she belonged. Robert King, 2 seats ahead on the aisle, turned slightly as if a draft had found him, then stopped the motion before it became a full look. His jaw tightened the small amount of a man adding up a loss he would never have to name out loud. He did not speak, he did not need to. His silence was a paragraph any attentive listener could read. The narrator did not amplify it. It simply placed that silence beside the steadier quiet of someone who had returned without raising her voice and without letting the room decide what that meant. Captain Foster took his leave with a polite nod, and Linda slid into the narrow space by Monica's shoulder, her voice pitched for confidentiality without secrecy. "If you need anything, Let me know personally, she said. I'll check on you as we continue. There was nothing performative in it. It sounded like a promise a neighbor might make when she sees a light still on late in the evening. Claire followed a beat behind with a small basket of snacks arranged as though it mattered that even small choices looked generous. Would you like sparkling or still? She asked. Careful, careful. Monica asked for still, and Claire nodded with a faint exhale, the kind people release when the thing that was about to go wrong has simply gone right. Around them, the front cabin's choreography resumed. A cart glided to a halt with a polite squeak. A menu card described a salad of farro and herbs and a choice between roasted salmon and a beef entree. A basket of warm rolls wafted a scent that Osh A would never measure and anyone's grandmother would recognize. The oxygen of courtesy returned to the room, not because nothing had happened, but because the people charged with care were working to make right what had gone crooked. In the row across, a woman in a navy cardigan adjusted a travel pillow and fell into the sort of sleep that looks like trust. 2 seats up, a man lifted his glass at an angle that said he liked being seen enjoying what he had been given. Monica let the scene assemble itself without pushing it. She looked out at a cloud bank shaped like a slow river and let the engine sound and the breath of the cabin braid themselves into a calm her body could borrow. Then came the work. She opened the slim laptop, set it on the tray table, and adjusted the brightness so that the screen glowed softly. Not a flare in anyone's eyes. The cursor blinked in a patient rhythm. The narrator saw what she wrote and how she wrote it. Date spelled out in words. Time marked with careful phrases that an audio reader would not mangle. Seat numbers rendered as names to Bravo, 4 Alpha, so the record spoke in human terms. The notes stayed descriptive, not inflamed. Captain apologized for earlier confusion. Offered seat 4 Alpha, she typed. Lead attendant, attentive. Claire cautious, voice warmer now than in economy. Return to first class observed by nearby passengers. Reaction muted. One visible tightening of jaw from male passenger ahead. The words did their job without reaching for what they could not hold. A soft bump of turbulence passed through, hardly more than the plane rolling its shoulder. The fasten seatbelt sign remained dark. The captain's voice did not arrive. Linda checked on the galley. Claire exchanged a brief whisper with another attendant and returned with a small dish of mixed nuts. No nuts for me, said a woman 3 rows ahead, almost absent-mindedly, and Claire thanked her for the reminder with a nod that belonged to someone who knew such reminders keep people safe. The narrator held the detail without making it heavy. It slid by, a piece of grain in a larger wood. Monica took a sip of water and let memory place itself gently beside the present. The gate desk, the measuring delay, the walk to the back where kindness had to be couriered by another person's voice. She allowed the recollection to add depth, not weight, to what she was recording now. If a listener over 60 had been seated beside her, that person would have recognized the virtue of not letting the bruise choose the color of the next hour. The virtue was not submission, it was stewardship of attention. Her posture, open and quiet, said that loud enough. The story never forgot where it was. An American cabin with all its rituals on offer. A flight attendant folded a napkin under a glass because a glass should not mark a table. A passenger said, "Thank you, ma'am," in a way that was simple and real. The clink of utensils, the small scrape of a plate placed gently down, the soft courtesy of when you have a moment and no rush at all, and how are you doing up here? All of it lived here. Even as the quieter current of earlier harm continued to flow under the carpet and through the walls like a draft no one wanted to admit they felt. When Linda passed again, Monica met her eyes and gave the smallest nod. Not absolution, but acknowledgement of effort. Linda returned it with a tired, grateful smile that had nothing to sell. Claire collected the glass from the aisle and steadied herself with one hand on the seat back, the other balancing the tray, the way servers learn to balance 7 plates on 4 fingers. She looked younger. Now that the line between right and wrong, between how someone should be treated and how they had been treated, had been redrawn where it belonged. Robert shifted once more, checking the overhead panel as if some light there would explain why the world occasionally declines to confirm his expectations. He said nothing and turned back to his screen, the kind of retreat a person makes, not from shame but from an irritation that does not want company. The cabin accepted his choice the way rooms do when they are well-trained, without comment. It would have been easy for the narrative to declare victory, to close the case on a scene restored, to let the next pages coast on the soft glide of good intentions resumed. But the narrator kept faith with the larger arc. The high blue held, the hum steady, and the minutes unspooled. In that way, airborne minutes are measured more by small gestures than by clocks. In that stretch of calm, the plane was a floating neighborhood with its own etiquette, its own weather, its own tendency to mistake quiet for completion. Monica's hands returned to the keyboard. The cursor blinked. She added a final line to the segment she was drafting, careful to name only what could be proved and to leave room for what might yet arrive. She had earned the sip of water that followed, the slow exhale that is not a sigh but an agreement to keep going. She placed the glass back on the napkin, wiped the edge with the fold crew had provided, and set her palms flat for a second as if feeling the pulse of the machine through the laminate. Then, the room changed. It was as small as the way a breath catches, and as large as the difference between an uneventful flight and a story people will later tell with their hands. From the row ahead, a voice carried with that thinned urgency older listeners know the pitch of alarm. A person tries to stand down out of respect for other people's nerves, the pitch that fails because fear has its own volume. Monica's eyes lifted from the screen. She turned her head. A man was half standing, an arm braced on the seat in front of him, his face a canvas of dread and pleading. Somewhere just beyond his shoulder, another body moved wrong, chest laboring, mouth opening for air that did not seem to arrive. She did not look at Linda to see if Linda had heard. She did not look at Claire to ask permission from a hierarchy no one would want invoked at such a time. She looked at the person who had spoken and then at the person whose breath had become the only subject that mattered. The next word, the next motion, the next 5 seconds would draft a different kind of record. She touched the edge of the laptop, not to close an alarm, but to mark the place where one kind of work yields to another. We have a problem. She can't breathe. The sound that followed the cry for help was not panic but purpose. The way a neighborhood rouses itself when a porch light blinks 3 times after midnight. Monica stood, steadying the tray table with one palm so it would not jolt the glass and startle anyone further. Marcus' old line returned to her like a quiet drumbeat. Emergencies reveal who really matters, and she lets it tune her attention, broad and calm. Tom Green was half upright in his aisle seat, one hand braced on the headrest in front of him, the other hovering over his wife's shoulder as if he could lift the air closer to her. Lisa Green's breath came shallow and quick, eyes wide as if opening them could create more space for oxygen. A flush rose along her throat in a bloom the color of worry itself. The service cart stood frozen mid-aisle, wheels at angles, napkins trembling on their stack. Susan Miller, senior by years and manner, held a bottle of water that made no sense in her hand. Claire Johnson, younger, eyes bright with fear she worked to leash, looked from face to face as though choosing where to place her next second. The first request for help flew on a frequency that beats words, then settled into sentences people could grab. She has an allergy, Tom said, and his voice had that neat edge older listeners know, the one men stand on to fear when they're trying to behave. She needs her injection. He patted for a bag that had somehow migrated to the floor by his feet. Where is it, Lisa? Where is it? Lisa shook her head once, slow, the question somehow too large to hold. Monica made the space for the moment that had to be made. Is there an EpiPen on board? The consonants clicked like a light switch. Heads turned. A man across the aisle reached up, searching in the overhead as if the right compartment might belong to luck. Claire blinked and found her voice. We carry epinephrine, she said. I need to confirm and retrieve it. She did not move. Linda Perez, somewhere beyond the curtain, heard the change in air and stepped into the cabin with a presence that steadied more than the cart could. Claire, Linda said. Soft command under the silk, galley, now. Susan, clear his space. A phone call. The aisle wide-mouthed, accepting emergency, the way a throat accepts breath. A stranger's hand lifted a purse out of the way. Someone slid knees to an angle that gave Tom room. I have an EpiPen, a woman 2 rows back said, already rising, tone firm with the authority that homes acquire when neighbors keep each other alive. She placed the pen in Monica's open palm, and for a breath, all the stale debates of a life outside the plane stepped aside to let competence through. Monica clicked the cap free with the simple finality the device requires. Tom, she said, voice low, as if privately speaking into the noise, outer thigh, through clothing, if needed. Hold for a slow count. He nodded hard. The way you nod when your hands must become certain. He placed and pressed. A tiny sound that was not a sound passed through Lisa's body, a small argument against collapse. Time slowed its usual trick in the minutes that followed, stretching so that every detail could register and become proof later. Linda knelt, one knee carefully placed to avoid crowding Lisa's legs. Susan hovered. A sentence stuck on the wrong page. Claire reappeared with a kit that clicked open, hands trembling, then steadied by work. Oxygen, a voice said from nowhere and everywhere, and a canister arrived from behind the curtain, as if the plane had decided it would be a hospital for as long as necessary. Linda fitted the mask and turned the valve with a confident twist that released a hiss that sounded like relief. Monica counted in her head, not to boss time around, but to keep fear from ripping it to pieces. Tom lay his head against the seatback for a single second of private prayer. No words, just a face holding itself together, then looked at his wife again. "Breathe with me, honey," he said, and exhaled. And anyone within earshot who had ever loved anybody felt that line settle into their bones. The front cabin, glossy and curated moments earlier, became human, which is to say a little messy and very tender. A glass tipped and was caught. A napkin fell and was forgotten. A man who had been performing enjoyment of a sparkling wine held it flat against his table so it would not add drama to a scene that needed no more. Robert King turned once, a protest flowering and then closing back into a bud when he saw the oxygen mask. The hum of engines continued, the predictability of their song reminding everyone that the world still held, even while one breath could not. "Response is improving," Linda said after the measured eternity of a minute. Lisa's chest loosened under the fabric of her blouse. Color began to recede to where it belonged. Claire held the kit with both hands as if steadying it steadied herself. Monica watched the change write itself across Lisa's face and let her own shoulders ease one step down the staircase of tension. She spoke warmly to Lisa through the mask. "You are doing well," she said. "Stay with the breath. Stay with us." The narrator could hear the cabin exhale in a low wave, that collective relief older readers recognize from church basements and waiting rooms. Not celebration, not yet, but gratitude for a door that has not closed. Linda shifted to logistics, the way good leaders do once the crash has been avoided. "We will notify the captain," she told Tom. "We will have paramedics meet the flight on arrival. Do you need anything now?" Tom shook his head and then nodded in the same motion. Too many needs trying to line up in a small hallway. "Just keep that on her," he said, eyes wet without apology. "Keep that on her and do not go far." Linda's hand touched his shoulder in a gesture that carried more comfort than a dozen sentences. Susan rearranged the service cart into a barricade that made a little privacy, at last looking as if her job description had included the words care and not just compliance. While oxygen worked and the medicine trimmed the emergency down to a manageable size, the edges of anger began to show their faces around the room. A man on the far side of the aisle murmured to his partner. They did not answer the first call. A woman near the bulkhead said to no one and everyone he was pressing that button. The blue light of the call signal, which had shone earlier like a patient star, seemed to glow in retrospect with a different meaning. Monica did not jump to judgment, but she wrote what belonged in the ledger. Call placed. Delay. Response only after repeated requests. Oxygen arrived when asked for, but not before it could have been anticipated. The difference between late and almost on time is the difference between a scare and a grief you carry like a stone. The galley became a command post. Linda spoke quietly into the interphone, voice steady enough to borrow. Claire collected wrappers no longer needed and stacked what could be stacked, sweeping a small usable order back into the sink. She met Monica's eyes by accident, then on purpose, and something like honesty passed between them. "Thank you for asking for the pen," she said, almost under her breath. And Monica nodded once in a way that praised only the thing worth praising. Responsiveness learned quickly. The small acts that make an American cabin humane returned, now edged with the dignity that comes after shared risk. A passenger put away a camera phone without being asked. Another leaned across the aisle to hand Tom a tissue and said, "Sir," in a tone that gave the word its proper weight. Robert adjusted his jacket and found out he did not need to stand. The woman who had offered her EpiPen returned to her seat and closed her eyes for a single moment of private repairs, the way people do after they hand a stranger what a family member would usually be asked to hold. Monica's notes moved from acute to reflective, the way a story does once its heart rate comes back down. "The crew stabilized the passengers with oxygen and medication," she wrote. "Initial delay notable. The younger attendant is apologetic. Senior attendant efficient once engaged. The lead attendant is decisive. She did not write any verdicts. She wrote facts that would become the ground a verdict could walk on later without sinking. The narrator kept the temperature even, because the audience deserves warmth without heat when fear has been working the room. The clink and glide of service resumed in halting measures, then in smoother ones, the way a song finds its chorus again after a verse that wandered into a different key. A tray appeared near Monica's elbow and then was withdrawn without comment when the server realized the gesture felt ordinary against a moment that was still extraordinary. Lisa's eyes focused. She squeezed Tom's hand. He bent his head, and quiet things moved through him like weather finally breaking. Linda stood, rolled her shoulders, and took a breath that said she would be back in the galley in 2 seconds and in the aisle in 2 more. Claire folded the kit close with a reverence that did not feel performative anymore. Monica sat back as order settled, and in the settling, little truths rose to the surface like bubbles. She let them be. Quiet can be the best witness. She felt the weight of the pen still in her palm where she had passed it to Tom and then set it on the tray for return. The plane itself seemed to notice that a circle had closed. Noise back to its ordinary range. Smiles coming gingerly back to faces that had forgotten them for a while. The smell of warm rose daring to exist again. Then the cabin did what cabins do when danger has passed. It reached for conversation. It reached for someone to tell what had just happened and why it had taken as long as it did. Susan spoke first, too loud, too quickly. "We responded as soon as we could," she said to Tom. Voice defensive, hand tight, on the back of a seat. "We have procedures." Tom did not answer. Linda stepped in, a touch on Susan's arm like a metronome, slowing a rushed musician. "She is recovering," Linda said, choosing the only subject that deserved stage time. "We will stay right here until her breathing is steady. If she needs anything, I will be the one to bring it." The next minutes arrived with a rhythm of cleanup. Wrappers gathered, cart realigned, an extra bottle of water placed by Lisa's elbow. Claire's face had lost its rigidness. In its place was an expression that suggested something had completed itself inside her too. She leaned toward Susan so that others would not hear and forgot for a second that Monica's ears were not dulled by relief. The whisper was not meant for the record. The whisper became the record. It was Emily's idea to kick her out. The cabin settled after the storm the way a field settled after hard rain, puddles shining where the light touched, and people moving more carefully because they had been reminded of fragility. Monica stayed near the road until Lisa's breath no longer argued with the air, and Tom's hands stopped shaking. She remembered the word that had floated at the gate like a small accusation, fraudulent, and let it take its place in the record. No bigger than the other facts, no smaller either. A gentle announcement rose over the speakers with that practiced calm older travelers know by heart, advising the cabin that paramedics would meet the flight on arrival, that everyone should remain seated until the crew guided the way. No one argued with that. The plane rode the descent like a long exhale, the land below gathering into neighborhoods and streets, the bay a plain of hammered silver, the hills leaning close as if to welcome and to question. At San Francisco International, the jet bridge coughed its cool breath into the doorway, and the crew opened the cabin with the careful grace of hosts who now understood what hosting costs. Paramedics arrived with quiet authority, faces composed, hands exact. They moved Lisa onto a narrow aisle chair and spoke to Tom in a tone designed to return control to a man who had just lost it and then found it again. Linda stayed near, the way good leaders do, making space for professionals and offering Tom a sentence he could hold on to, that his wife would be seen immediately, that a report would be made, that nothing essential would be left to memory. Claire carried the oxygen canister as if it were a small lamp, and when she passed Monica, she let a look of unvarnished gratitude hold for a beat before turning back to the patient. Susan arranged wrappers and flus into neat rows on a tray that did not need to be neat anymore, a ritual of control when the larger thing had slipped. Monica and Marcus did not rush to leave. They stood aside for a woman with a cane, let the family assemble itself around the stroller that did not wish to fold, and quietly told Linda that they would be available for any questions from the captain or the ground team. The captain thanked them in person at the door, the way some men do when a uniform makes them careful about how they distribute words. He did not offer explanations. He offered respect. Outside in the jet bridge, a supervisor with a tablet approached Linda and spoke in that low managerial voice that can be either balm or varnish, depending on what follows. He glanced at Monica and glanced away, as if the story could be shortened by avoiding eye contact with its protagonist. Down in the concourse, the air smelled of coffee and disinfectant and the late afternoon sweetness of a place that has seen 1,000 goodbyes and 1,000 reunions. Monica paused by a window where the runway flared bright white and sent a brief message. Marcus, who had deplaned with the economy crowd and circled back at an unhurried pace, joined her. They did not look like colleagues. They looked like two travelers deciding whether to stop for a sandwich. A member of ground staff approached with a professional smile that had learned to hide fatigue. David Collins, he said, holding a badge that named him a regional operations director. Rachel Lee, said the woman beside him, her suit the soft brown of good leather. Her voice practiced for rooms where tone keeps people from saying the thing they came to say. We would like to bring you to a small office to debrief and to make sure you are all right. The office was the kind of room airports keep for many purposes and claim for only one at a time. The furniture was honest and a little tired. The table a laminate meant to be wiped clean of crumbs and conflicts. A small refrigerator hummed. The blinds were half open, letting in a rectangle of light that made dust look like a galaxy. David and Rachel sat with their backs to that light, a trick no one had taught them and that they had learned anyway. Linda arrived with them, still in her uniform, still carrying that balance of compassion and command that had steadied the cabin. Claire came at Linda's request and took a seat near the end of the table. Susan hovered by the door until Rachel gestured her in with a polite, unavoidable smile. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a decision. David began with a sentence corporate training writes on a whiteboard. We appreciate your patience. He added others in the same family. We take these matters seriously. We want to understand what occurred. We are committed to the safety and dignity of all our customers. He looked at Monica the way a man looks at a situation he hopes will behave. Monica let the air move. She placed a slim leather wallet on the table, opened it with the slow care of someone who knows that timing is part of speech, and showed the identification that had traveled with her through a dozen flights and a dozen rooms like this one. When she spoke, her voice did not rise and did not harden. It carries the warmth of a radio that comforts more because it does not shout. I am a federal investigator with the Department of Transportation. The sentence did not raise the temperature. It changed the weather. Rachel drew in a breath that stopped just short of a gasp and then became professional again. David's eyes flicked from the credential to Monica's face and back, as if checking whether the seal had a heartbeat. Linda's posture did not change. Some part of her had known a truth was coming and had already made room for it. Claire's shoulders lowered, the relief of finally being the right room for the right reason settling onto her like a shawl. Susan swallowed, the movement small but visible. A woman discovering that the hallway she had been walking had a different destination than she thought. Monica did not feel the silence. She placed a neatly printed report on the table, its cover page dated in words so that nothing would be misread by a machine and nothing would be misheard by a voice reader later. She stated, calmly, what the document contained. A chronological account from the airport gate to the moment the paramedics took custody of a passenger. Descriptions of interactions, the times written out, the C's named in words, the observation that a call light had been answered late, the observation that a paying passenger had been compelled to surrender a purchased seat to another passenger without documented cause. She did not attach adjectives to people. She attached facts to actions. She requested that the airline provide, within a reasonable time frame, copies of the manifest for the flight, any seating change logs, any notation of an equipment change, all internal messages exchanged by gate and crew regarding seat assignment after boarding began, the training records for the employees involved, and any prior complaints filed concerning differential treatment of passengers in similar circumstances. David said the words absolutely and of course, and then said we will need to consult because some words are costumes for others. Rachel found her voice again and tried a different key. We value our crew, she said, and we know they strive to do the right thing under pressure. It was a kind of sentence that covers a great deal and answers very little. Monica nodded. I do not doubt that, she said. Today, under pressure, a person was nearly harmed more than she was, and a person was asked to accept less than what she purchased without a documented reason. I am here for the record. The record will support a correction, and it will protect the people who got it right. She looked at Linda, and in that look, placed credit where it belonged. Linda met it and held it, the moment like a handshake that required no hands. David turned to the crew, inviting their accounts with a careful phrase. We simply want to understand, he said, and then he added a question almost too gentle for the room. Where did this begin? Susan spoke first, which was a kind of courage, though the room would not reward it. At the gate, she said. Emily brought us a concern about a ticket. She said there might be a fraud issue. She asked that we help with a relocation for a premium passenger. The word premium sat between them like a coin. Rachel looked interested and dismayed at once. And did you verify the issue? She asked. Susan's eyes slid to the side. We were told it would be handled, she said. We proceeded. Claire's voice, when it came, was soft but did not tremble. I believed Emily, she said. I did not ask to see a note. I did not ask the question I should have asked. Later, when the passenger needed urgent help, I was slow to respond to the call light. She did not look at Monica while she said the next sentence. She looked at the table. I am sorry. The apology was not a plaster. It was a brick. It built something. Linda added her account in the steady way responsible people do when they are not surprised by truth. I corrected what I could when it came to my attention, she said. I regret that it did not come sooner. Monica accepted the apologies not as payment but as position, coordinates on a map that would guide the work ahead. She asked David to confirm that Emily Rogers would be made available for a formal interview and requested that any attempt to contact her include a preservation notice for her electronic communications. She asked Rachel to name a liaison who would be responsible for collecting and transmitting documents. She did not raise her voice when she said that any attempt to dissuade witnesses from speaking would itself be a matter for enforcement. She did not need to. The room could hear the ballast under every word. Outside the blinds, a luggage cart beeped like a bird in a mechanical meadow, and the child laughed the way only children laugh in airports, bright and brave. Inside, David agreed to the liaison. Rachel wrote names and times and made calls that sounded different now, stripped of the tone that tried to end stories before they had been told. Linda excused herself to check on Lisa's transfer and returned with a short report that the passenger was stable and en route to a hospital where she would be evaluated, that Tom had been offered transportation and had accepted. In 100 small ways, the day was bending to her right, not because anyone declared victory, but because truth had been allowed to take up its proper space. The climax did not need thunder. It required only the dignity of procedure finally holding for the person who had respected it all along. Monica signed the envelope that would carry the official report and placed copies of her requests inside. She noted that she would be forwarding a digital copy to the department, that follow-up interviews would be scheduled, that the agency would consider whether corrective measures would include training, disciplinary action, or penalties. She stood. The chair legs made a mile sound like a tiny wave pulling back from a shore. She thanked Linda by name, thanked Claire by name, did not thank Susan, not yet, and did not punish her either. She did not have to. The work in front of the company would do that, one way or another. They left the room with the plain motions of people who had other flights to catch and other days to live. The corridor smelled like carpet and coffee and the metal breath of air conditioning. Near the window, the late sun turned the planes on the tarmac into bright knives and the bay into silk. Monica closed her wallet and slid it into her bag. Marcus waited until the door had sighed shut behind them and then leaned closer so that the words would belong only to the two of them and to the story they were carrying. This is just the beginning. They won't see it coming. Bailey. After the doors opened and the cool jet bridge air met the cabin, the noise of the day fell to a hush that sounded like relief. What lingered was not the commotion, but the steady way a breath returned, and the apology found its shape, and the record of truth took its rightful seat. From such moments, a gentler order can be made. Love shows itself as attention, and accountability becomes a kind of repair. The first bricks in building a new common home where dignity is not granted by favor but guarded by habit. The lesson travels well beyond airplanes. Families, neighborhoods, and waiting rooms all heal the same way. When someone names the wrong, makes room for the harmed, and chooses kindness long enough for redemption to begin. If this story has warmed the quiet corner of the heart, let that warmth travel on to someone who needs it today, like a porch light left on at dusk, small and steady, guiding us all the last steps home.